The whole idea of execution is to end someone's life, and it's not about the method of the killing. Authorities in charge of executing the criminals have the duty to make sure that the execution is as quick and painless as possible. Even those who have been executing criminals for a very long time aren't always perfect at their job, and things can go wrong. Joseph Wood was a convicted killer who in 1989 murdered his girlfriend and her father. In 2014, he was executed in the state of Arizona. At the time, European countries who usually manufacture the drugs to execute criminals had banned the export of drugs used to do such things. This forced the state of Arizona to try and synthesize their own lethal injection drugs given to prisoners for their execution. Wood was one of the first victims to try the newly synthesized drug. Instead of dying within 7 minutes after the injection, it took Joseph Wood an estimated 2 hours before he was pronounced dead. He suffered through 640 gasps before he could finally shut his eye. After World War II, many Nazi war criminals were tried at the Nuremberg trials. Many high officials were sentenced to death. That includes Hermann Göring, who gave the orders to bomb millions of innocent people. However, the person in charge of hanging many of the Nazi officials had gotten his calculations wrong. Instead of them dying painlessly, these war criminals would hang for 15 minutes at the end of the rope, slowly strangling to death. Number 3. Iraq underwent some tough treatments under the Hussein regime. At last, when Saddam Hussein was captured and sentenced to death by hanging method, the world was happy to watch. Saddam was not the only person to be executed. His brother Barzan Ibrahim was responsible for murdering 148 Shiite Muslims and was also sentenced to death. However, his hanging went a little different. The executioner misjudged the length of the loop, which would go around his neck. Instead of Barzan falling through the small trapdoor, he fell so fast that it caused his neck to break and the rope to rip his head right off. Number 2. In the mid-1500s, the son of Lady Margaret Pole had refused to accept that the king's marriage to Anne Boleyn was legal. King Henry had sent men to capture him, but they couldn't get to him because he escaped to France. Instead, the men went after his mother, Lady Margaret Pole. She was sentenced to be beheaded in 1541. As the mother's head laid on the wood, with the side of her neck facing upwards, the executioner was inexperienced, so he missed her neck several times, chipping away her shoulders instead and cutting off part of her head before he could finally slash her head off. Number 1. The electric chair was invented in 1880. It was an alternate method of hanging and was meant to kill criminals in the most painless manner. In 1997, Pedro Medina was a murderer in Florida who received the death penalty by electrocution. Usually what happens is a wet sponge is placed on top of the criminal's head and on top of it a metallic cap. Medina experienced 2 minutes of slow death as he just would not die. As the executioner pulled the switch on, Medina's head was inflamed. People could smell burning flesh. The executioner was forced to stop the current, but after 2 minutes, Medina died. It was later reported that the sponge that was put on top of his head was not wet enough. Thanks for watching the video and stay updated by subscribing to us.
23rd, 1991, a young woman's body was found in Goose Lake Wildlife Preserve in Milwaukee, Wisconsin by a guy walking his dog. She was partly decomposed, yet obvious signs of trauma were still visible. She had been severely battered about the head and chest, and her throat had been slashed. Her legs were spread and her shirt pulled up to expose her breasts. She had been sexually assaulted after death. Strangely, her hands had been severed and were later recovered by hunters, lacking fingertips. On March 15, 1991, a morgue photograph was downloaded into a computer, and a visual image of what the young woman might have looked like in life was created to assist detectives with identifying her remains. The sad story received national coverage, but no leads were forthcoming. Weeks later, a woman who had seen the poster of her believed she might know the identity of the dead girl. The woman informed police she believed this girl had been seen with a pimp named Joseph White. In 1990, White had recruited a young woman to work for him. One day she vanished. The woman had run away from a group home and straight into the arms of Joseph White. The group home's administrator saw the photographs of the missing girl, and she identified her as 16-year-old Doris Ann McLeod. Police discovered that McLeod was sexually abused as a child and eventually lived in 17 foster homes. From the beginning, McLeod experienced problems with White. She didn't want to prostitute herself. It wasn't the life she hoped to find in the city. June 18, 1991, detectives arrived at White's house in a Milwaukee inner-city neighborhood. They entered by the front door, but cowardly White exited by the back, leaving his 3-year-old son behind. Inside the filthy, unkempt house, police discovered clothes and jewelry belonging to McLeod. However, this evidence remains largely circumstantial. White's 3-year-old son suddenly tugged on the flashlight on a detective's belt, curious about the object. He wanted to play with it. When the child, Joseph Jr., was shown a picture of McLeod, he said, "That's Dee." He told the officers that the monster in the house hurt her. Little Joseph Jr. led the police downstairs to McLeod's makeshift bedroom. He pointed the flashlight to steam pipes in the ceiling and explained that he saw Dee hanging from the pipes, telling the men how the monster had bit her fingers. This is crucial evidence, as McLeod's hand was found missing her fingertips, information that was never released to the public. The adorable little boy then stated, "I heard the monster. God damn it, why don't you go upstairs? Now get out of here." Detectives believed this was where McLeod was tortured and possibly killed. Upstairs, they found a pad of paper on which there was a gang pad that contained the rules for the gang. They read on this pad that 50 to the chest was the punishment for a girl who no longer wanted to be a prostitute, and that this was conducive to the wounds on Doris's body. Joseph White was sentenced to life in prison with no possibility of parole until he's 108 years old. On December 31st, 1989, Noreen Boyle, wife of a popular and charismatic doctor in Mansfield, Ohio, disappeared. Noreen had been married to her husband, John Boyle, for 22 years. They have a son, 11-year-old Collier, and 2.5-years-old Elizabeth, who they adopted from Taiwan. A good friend of Noreen reported her missing when she hadn't shown up for their lunch date. Police investigating her disappearance found that John Boyle had numerous affairs during their marriage, and that he had bought a house in Erie, Pennsylvania for his pregnant mistress, intending to move in. Police also found that Noreen had asked for a divorce prior to her disappearance. Police suspected it's more than a missing persons case and believed Noreen is probably a victim of foul play, so they interviewed Collier privately about the night his mother disappeared. Collier said that at about 3:15 a.m. of December 31st, he heard his parents arguing, and then later he heard a big thud coming from the room of his parents. Shortly after that, he heard his father walking down the hallway towards his room. He said his father opened his door, looking at him for a long period of time as if he was checking on him. Collier pretended to be asleep. The next morning, his father told him that his mother had left on a vacation. Collier also said that after his mother went missing, his father went on back and forth trips from their home in Mansfield to his new house in Erie, Pennsylvania, and that after his father came back from Erie, his shoulder and arms were very sore, and he asked Collier to rub liniment oil on him. Police checked on local businesses and found that John rented a jackhammer and had also purchased a roll of indoor-outdoor carpet a few days before Noreen disappeared. The retailer who sold John's new home in Erie told investigators that he asked to lower the floor in the basement so his kids could play basketball. 26 days after Noreen disappeared, police got a search warrant for John Boyle's new home in Erie, Pennsylvania. They went to check the basement, where they saw the floor had been recently painted gray and new shelves installed at one end. When police went looking around, they noticed the floor was recently filled with concrete and that it's soft, so they pulled up the carpet and began digging. Police found Noreen's badly decomposed body, her head covered with a plastic bag and wearing a Rolex watch. The watch had stopped on December 31st, the day Noreen disappeared. Police concluded that John struck Noreen in the head, then suffocated her by putting a plastic bag over her head. John Boyle was arrested, and his son Collier testified against him in 1990. He was found guilty of the murder and was sentenced to life in prison. In 2011, 22-year-old Victoria Perez, who was due to give birth in about a month, disappeared after a doctor's visit at Rapide Regional Medical Center in Louisiana. Victoria was last seen walking on Interstate 49 at the Woodworth exit on March 11th. The day before, she was seen at the Rapide Regional Medical Center. After the appointment, Victoria called the van transportation company to pick her up and bring her home. The van was delayed, and by the time they got there, Victoria was gone. The case remained cold until January 2015, when the Allen Parish Sheriff's Office received a tip that led them to a home on Matthew Street in Oakdale. It was there that her remains were found. It all began when a woman named Pamela Causey Fregia was desperate to stop her husband from leaving. She claimed she was pregnant, and she showed him a fake pregnancy test. He didn't believe her and moved to another state. Causey Fregia continued with her lie, sending him fake sonogram photos. Months passed, and Causey Fregia realized she needed a child. She traveled to a hospital with her daughter and tried to find an infant. Instead, she found Victoria Perez, who was 8 months pregnant. Causey Fregia lured Perez to her home with the promise of free baby clothes. When the pair arrived, Causey Fregia killed Perez by blunt force. She then tried to cut the baby out of Perez but failed. Causey Fregia took Perez's body down the road to a wooded, family-owned property. She spent several days burning the body, and then she burned the remains. 4 years later, Causey Fregia's own children turned her into the police. Police sent cadaver dogs around the property, and they discovered Perez's remains. Causey Fregia was charged with first-degree murder and first-degree feticide. 2nd, 1991, a 78-year-old grandmother named Lucille Johnson was found bludgeoned to death in her Holiday, Utah home. According to police reports, she was found dead by her daughter the very next day, and her body had been battered and her bloodied face was covered with a pillow. Interestingly, investigators at the time found Lego bricks on Johnson's living room floor, in the home's entry, and on the driveway. Detectives collected the toys as evidence after family members told them that while Johnson had toys for her grandchildren, she would never leave them lying around. Investigators also learned that a ring and necklace Johnson regularly wore were missing. An autopsy revealed that Johnson died from strangulation and blunt force trauma. Salt Lake County Sheriff's investigators worked on the case but were unable to solve it. In August 2013, a team led by Unified Police Sergeant Michael Ike Miyashiro reopened the case. The detectives sent scrapings that had been collected from under Johnson's fingernails for DNA testing and recovered a profile that matched a combined DNA index system profile for a 47-year-old John Sansing, a man who was currently in prison in Arizona for another murder committed in 1997. Investigators also matched fingerprints from the Lego toys gathered during the original investigation with one of Sansing's children, who was 5 years old at the time of the killing. Police believed that the child was used to gain entry, and that Sansing and Johnson previously did not know one another. In 1988, the body of a woman was discovered in an Ohio river, under ice. She had been strangled to death, and most of the evidence had been washed away by the rushing water. A check of missing persons reports identified the woman as 32-year-old Margie Coffey, a single mother of 2 young children. She had been reported missing 10 days earlier. The autopsy revealed that she had been strangled with her own scarf. The coroner estimated she had been dumped in the creek 10 days earlier, the same day she disappeared. Police investigating the case found that Margie had a relationship with a married police officer named Charles Oswald. And investigators who examined Margie's body and clothing discovered some fibers found on her leg warmers that matched the unique carpeting in Charles's cop car that night. But this evidence is just circumstantial. Police wonder, what is the motive? Police found out that when Margie applied for financial aid at college, she was required to identify her second child's father. She named Charles Oswald as the father. A paternity test was administered and came out to be 99.98% positive. Investigators also discovered that Charles had refused to pay for child support when Margie asked. Another woman who claimed to be Charles's new mistress said that Charles told her about the murder of Margie Coffey. She stated that Charles and Margie were together in a car talking about child support. Charles offered Margie $3,000, but she said it's not enough. Charles got angry and started to yell calling her obscene names, and she responded by slapping him across the face. Charles then reached over and strangled Margie in the cop car and put her lifeless body into the backseat of the car. He then drove to a creek nearby and threw her over a bridge, in hopes that all the forensic evidence would wash away downstream. Charles Oswald was found guilty of voluntary manslaughter and abusing a corpse. He was sentenced to 10 to 25 years in prison.
Throughout history, people have moved across the great expanses of the globe to establish communities. Some of them have even grown into large cities, which harbor millions of individuals. However, some people have chosen to remain in smaller groups that are totally off the radar. These communities have withstood the test of time in near isolation. In fact, many residents have never left the small area of isolation they call home. About 3,200 kilometers, 2,000 miles northeast of New Zealand, sits the tiny island of Palmerston. Occupied by a mere 62 people who are all from the same bloodline, Palmerston is one of the most isolated communities on the planet. Discovery of Palmerston Island is credited to Captain James Cook in 1774. The 62 inhabitants of the island can be traced back to just one person, William Marsters. As the first permanent inhabitant of the island, he took up residency there in 1863 with his Polynesian wife and her 2 cousins. After being granted possession of the island by Queen Victoria, Marsters took his wife's cousins as his second and third wives. He and his wives had 23 children in total. Before his death in 1899, today, all but 3 of the people on the island are direct descendants of William Marsters. Life on the island is one of isolation and simplicity. There are no shops, banks, or markets. Money is only used when buying and selling off the island, or when ships come with supplies from the outside world. Trade between islanders is the only way to get what you need. There is no true water system. Rainwater is collected for drinking, and there are 2 public toilets available on the main street. Electricity is only available for 6 hours each day. However, a new telephone station has been constructed to provide an easier connection to the outside world. If someone wants to visit Palmerston as a guest, he will be welcomed with open arms. The islanders love visitors and adopt any travelers as their own. Guests stay in the islanders' homes, as there are no hotels. However, the journey will be grueling. Palmerston is about 500 kilometers, 310 miles from the capital island of Rarotonga. It is 2 days sailing on Pacific seas. Boats going to the island are few and far between. So if you are looking for the ultimate island getaway, Palmerston. The Grand Canyon is one of the most visited vacation spots in the United States. With its breathtaking views and desert-dwelling critters, the canyon provides tourists with an escape from reality. However, many do not know about the secluded village of Supai, which is located in a side branch of the Grand Canyon known as Havasu Canyon. The village consists of members of the Havasupai tribe. They have inhabited the area for the past 800 years. The Havasupai people, also known as the people of the blue-green waters, thrive in this arid, solitary landscape by practicing irrigation farming in the summer as well as hunting certain animals available during the seasons. The blue waterfalls and springs provide the Supai villagers with both their namesake and their water source for survival. The land in which the Havasupai live is a protected reservation. Just how secluded is Supai Village? The 208 residents are the only people in the United States who still receive their mail and parcels by mule. A series of linked mules carry packages and mail to the village regularly. Any mail leaving there also bears a postmark that is unique to Supai. Tourists are welcome to visit Supai and its natural beauty, but it will take some rugged skills and determination to get there. The village is located 56 kilometers, 35 miles from the tourist hub of the Grand Canyon, and there are no paved roads to get there. The journey starts at the Hualapai hilltop. From this point, Supai can only be reached by foot, mule, or helicopter. It is 13 kilometers, 8 miles one way to reach the bottom of the canyon where the village lies. Supai will remain a hidden gem in the American frontier. No restaurants, no hotels, no credit cards, no safe beaches. This is the life of those living on Tristan da Cunha, the world's most remote populated island. Both the archipelago and the main island in the group are named Tristan da Cunha. These islands are in the middle of the Atlantic, i.e., the middle of nowhere. Tristan da Cunha lies 2,816 kilometers, 1,750 miles from South Africa, and 3,360 kilometers, 2,088 miles from South America. The nearest landmass to Tristan is St. Helena, which is a mere 2,430 kilometers, 1,510 miles from the island. Tristan was discovered by Tristão da Cunha in 1506. Unable to venture onto the island due to unsafe water, Tristão da Cunha named the main island and the archipelago after himself and took off. The first official mapping of the island was made by the French frigate La Roure du Bourges 261 years later. No attempt was made during the expedition to land on the island. The first true inhabitant of Tristan da Cunha arrived in 1810, when American explorer Jonathan Lambert landed on the island and proclaimed himself as its ruler. Due to the strategic positioning of the islands, they were annexed by the United Kingdom in 1816. Today, Tristan da Cunha is thriving with a population of 267 people. These individuals have access to many major amenities, including a hospital with dental treatment and operating theater, as well as a grocery store. However, orders must be made weeks or even months in advance for grocery items, as everything must be shipped to the island from the nearest location. Though modernity has taken over, the remoteness of the island still causes many hardships. Traditional electricity is not available anywhere on the island. Instead, diesel generators are centrally located between cottages in the only town, Edinburgh of the Seven Seas. Tristan da Cunha seems like an introvert's paradise, without any worries or anxieties. However, if this seems like a great place to settle down, be warned that the island is volcanic. Edinburgh of the Seven Seas sits at the base of a volcano that last erupted in the 1960s. So if you love remoteness, cows, and the threat of volcanoes, Tristan da Cunha may be the right home for. Utqiagvik is the northernmost city in America and the 9th most northern city in the world. Formerly known as Barrow in Alaska, this town lies well above the Arctic Circle and is a very remote and cold town. Although the weather is extreme, archaeological evidence indicates that people have been thriving in the Utqiagvik region from as early as AD 500. The headland was explored in 1826 by Frederick Beechey and named for Sir John Barrow, the prominent British promoter of Arctic explorations. The native Inupiat tribe call the area Utqiagvik, or place where owls are hunted. So, just how cold is Utqiagvik? The city is built upon a layer of permafrost that is up to 400 meters, 1,300 feet deep in places. The warm season in Utqiagvik lasts a mere 3.3 months, with average high temperatures measuring 2 degrees Celsius, 36 degrees Fahrenheit. The cold season lasts 4.4 months, and the average high temperature is minus 16 degrees Celsius, 3 degrees Fahrenheit. Along with the extreme temperatures, the people of Utqiagvik also deal with polar night. Normally starting in November, the sun sets in Utqiagvik and does not rise again for roughly 65 days. Nevertheless, the area's 4,429 residents thrive. Over 60% are Inupiat Eskimo. Even in the Arctic tundra, these polar survivors have a great quality of life and modernity. Their homes are heated by natural gas from local oil fields. They also have modern water and sewer systems. Trash pickup is also available from the city. The town has 7 churches, various schools, and Ilisagvik College. Communication is easy because there is phone, mail, radio, cable, and internet. Want to visit Utqiagvik? You can take advantage of hotels, restaurants, a dry cleaner, a bank, and a fur shop. Though modernity has a hold in Utqiagvik, the natives still take part in whaling and seal hunting to get them through the long, hard winters. However, you can only get to this remote location by plane, and it doesn't come cheap. So if you're interested in extreme cold, remote solitude, and perpetual night, Utqiagvik might just be the best place for you. In the Peruvian Andes, 64 kilometers, 40 miles north of Lake Titicaca, lies the town of La Rinconada, Peru. What makes this town so special? It is the highest human habitation in the world. La Rinconada was built at a height of over 4,900 meters, 16,000 feet. Lying at the top of Mount Ananea, it experiences sub-zero temperatures for most of the year. At this remote altitude, visitors can expect to experience the effects of extreme altitude sickness, including headaches, nausea, shortness of breath, and even death in some extreme cases. Approximately 50,000 people now call this squalid city home. Beyond the isolated locale and freezing temperatures, this town has no basic modern amenities and little infrastructure. La Rinconada has no sanitation system and no plumbing, making the entire community one of filth and destitution. Trash pickup is non-existent. Most people bury their trash outside of town or simply leave it where it falls. People living and working in La Rinconada also face treacherous conditions when coming in and out of their high-rise city, as the only roads leading into La Rinconada are as dirty as the city itself and iced over for most days of the year. But what drove all these people to live in a city of isolation and filth? Gold. Word got out that the area around La Rinconada was chock full of gold. Between 2001 and 2009, the town boomed with a 230% increase in habitation. Without regulations, the mines operate under an informal structure called the Cachorreo system. Miners work through the month for no pay. However, after their shifts, they can take home as much ore as they can carry, but they never know how much gold is in the ore. Isolated, filthy, poor, sad. These are a few words to describe La Rinconada. This is one remote community that is not worth the struggle to visit, even if the greatest fortune could be found in its hills. Thank you so much for watching, and if you enjoyed the video, please let me know by clicking the like button. Do share, write a comment, and don't forget to subscribe.